Hi and welcome back to the channel. And today we're just doing a bit of a viewer Q&A. I've had a few people ask me questions, and so I thought the best way to approach it would be to look at a few of the questions and then answer them for you here on the channel. And it might get you to know a bit more about me as well. So here we go. First up, we've got Simone asking, what gear do you use now? Well, depending what you're talking about, when I'm out hiking, I am using my core sort of kit of gear that I've developed over the years that I now use all the time. So I have this set of gear, which you can go to my blog or in the description below, but my main hiking kit includes Hyperlight Mountain Gear pack, which is my go-to pack now. Osprey make great packs, make no mistake, but I've gone more ultralight in recent years, and Hyperlight, based in the USA, makes some really well-made, strong, durable and waterproof packs, and they're also very light. I use their Porter pack, very large capacity. I can take it away for sort of 10 to 12 days, absolutely no problem at all, and have everything in there really nicely. So in terms of gear, there's heaps of it. I'll give you my core sort of range, and then I'll list in the notes below all the other stuff that I take, and a link to sort of my gear list. But mainly the core items that you need on every extended walk, your pack. The sleeping bag I use is a Patagonia. They released some sleeping bags a few years ago, and I tend to take that now. I do have some Western Mountaineering sleeping bags, but the Patagonia sleeping bag is now my go-to piece of sleepwear. So yeah, it's a Patagonia 850 down sleeping bag. I've had that in temperatures as cold as close to -15 one night down here in Tasmania, and I was quite warm. I did have every layer of clothing on as well, but I've used that in very cold temperatures and had no troubles. I love it that I can sit up in the sleeping bag and have your legs crossed while you eat some food or something and stay warm, because it's got a zipper system unlike other sleeping bags. So I really like that sleeping bag after using Western Mountaineering for years. In terms of clothing and shell wear, like your raincoat, I prefer these days a combination of Patagonia and Arc'teryx. Arc'teryx for all my shell, so my raincoat and my overpants, my waterproof pants, I use their gear, and then I use a lot of Patagonia for thermals and a fleece, as well as shorts and t-shirt, which I hike in. In terms of footwear, I love to wear my hiking boots, generally even on a day walk. I do a lot of trail running and lots of sneakers that I use, but when I'm hiking, I have broken my ankle in the past, and I prefer to wear a fully supporting boot. And for those, I tend to stick with the Scarpa boots. Scarpa Terra GTX are my go-to boot, but I also have some Salomon 4D GTX boots as well, but I always go back to the Scarpa Terra, which are a leather boot with a Gore-Tex lining, and I love those. Socks, underwear, I tend to go with Smartwool. They make great socks. I used to use Wigwam all the time, but Smartwool are my socks of choice these days, so that's all I really take, as well as underwear. They make woolen underwear, and some good beanies too. For hat protection, for head warmth, the Smartwool beanie is great. With tents, I'm a big fan of MSR tents. We've had a Mother Hubba for years. It's just about worn out now, and all my friends have MSR Mother Hubbas as well. I do have some smaller tents. I've got an MSR Hubba, or an MSR Access 2 for winter time and tougher, windier, colder conditions. But the MSR tents, my general go-to tent's the MSR Mother Hubba, which we use as a 2-man, even though it is a 3-man tent. And I have had 3 men in many times, but generally we like a bit of extra space and comfort, and we sacrifice a bit of extra weight to have that comfort. Being in Tasmania, we really can cop the weather quite badly, and it's important you have a strong tent. I have had a Hillyberg tent in the past, but I just found it a bit too small. It didn't live up to the expectation of being a 3-man tent. I ended up selling that and sticking with the MSR Mother Hubba. I have had some very rough windy nights in the MSR Mother Hubba, but the tent has survived. Albeit a bit of damage, has been a bit of damage to the tent in those winds, but we are talking, over 100 km/h winds it's in a couple of situations. All my cooking gear and camp stoves, I have always used, for the last 20 years, I've used MSR stoves on every trip. They are always my go-to stove. I use the Shellite fuel with them, but you can get the gas canister ones as well, which I do take occasionally. I've had a MSR Similite for 20 years, and I still use that same stove today. We also use a Dragonfly if there's a few more people, and also the Pocket Rocket stove is a good one when I'm just doing a day walk or an overnight short walk by myself. I take the Pocket Rocket. In terms of tech and equipment that I take, we'll cover that in another video at some stage, but generally one of the best bits of tech that I had that I use for trail running, hiking, bushwalking is my Garmin Fenix 6S, I think it's called, watch. It is it doesn't leave my side, it's on me all the time, and when I'm out in the wilderness I will preload maps or preload my route that I've planned into it. It's really handy. It's got all the functionalities I could need, and it also connects to my phone, so when I am out on any trip I've generally got my iPhone, latest edition, it's an iPhone 10, that's an iPhone 12, and I'll take that as well. And then I can use the Garmin apps both with my watch and with my next bit of equipment, the Garmin InReach, which you've seen before on this channel. I will take the Garmin InReach, and that's my satellite messenger and an EPIRB if I need it, an emergency positioning indication radio beacon, something or other. So yeah, I take that. I've never had to hit an EPIRB. I've been carrying one for 20 years. I have had a sat phone in the past which I took. That was an Inmarsat sat phone, great little phone, but the cost is a bit prohibitive if you're not using it all the time. The Garmin InReach is a great little device. You can get the InReach Mini as well these days. The InReach, I take that with me on every trip. I even take it when I'm traveling just in case, and it just allows me to stay in touch with my family at home, especially my wife, because when I'm out sometimes it can be for 10 to 12 days or even longer where I'm completely out of reach of any communication. So in the last few years that's been a real benefit to us, being able to stay in touch via text message on a daily basis. So that's a brief summary of some of the gear that I take. It's not all the gear. You can read a bit more on my website, but that just gives you a bit of an overview. That went in pretty in-depth, I guess. I could talk all day about gear, and we'll be reviewing more gear on the channel, so stay tuned for that, but thanks Simone for the question. Rich wrote in and said, what is the difference between bushwalking and hiking? You'll hear me referring to both these things all the time, and they're the same thing. In Tasmania and Australia we call hiking bushwalking, but internationally it's probably better known as hiking. I guess in Australia it's called bushwalking because there's a lot of bush here, a lot of forest, and when you're out walking you're often walking through the forest, hence the name bushwalking. But it is very much the same as hiking. I could be completely grammatically wrong, my English may not be the best sometimes, but yeah, bushwalking, hiking, same thing. Thanks Rich for the question. And another question from Matt. He asks, have you ever encountered any dangerous animals? Well, down here in Tasmania where I do most of my hiking, there's not too much in the way of dangerous animals. There's little wombats and things poking around. They're quite friendly and cute to have a look at. The most dangerous thing you could encounter would be a snake here in Tasmania. There's 3 types of snakes in Tasmania. They're all venomous, and one of them is normally quite small, and I haven't really heard of anyone getting bitten by them, the white-lipped whip snake. But there is also the tiger snake and the copperhead snake here in Tasmania. They are generally very shy and quite placid. You just don't want to accidentally tread on one, which is my biggest fear when out there. I see plenty of snakes, and generally they just slide off into the bush, but you don't want to accidentally tread on one, so you always got to be watching your feet. Because if you gave them a fright and trod on one, then they'll snap back and bite you. Death isn't that common. They are extremely venomous, but death isn't that common because of the way the venom runs down the back of their teeth. They don't inject the venom, it runs down the back of their fangs. So you can get some mild illness if you get bitten by one, but generally they'll monitor you in the hospital. You need to go straight to hospital if you get bitten. That's a no-brainer. There's a lot of first aid done in education and training around treating snake bite, which I won't go into here, but no, that's about the extent of the most dangerous animals you'd see here in Tasmania. There's probably a few more on the mainland of Australia, like crocodiles, saltwater crocodiles, and some other pretty dangerous snakes, jellyfish, things like that. In Australia we've got it all. On other trips overseas I've encountered, on safari in Africa, we've come pretty close to lions and things, but that's a story for another day. Next question's from Joel. He says, what got you into hiking, and what time of day do you like to hike? Well, I've talked about this before, but I sort of got into hiking originally as a young guy in the Cub Scouts, and then again at school, but I really got inspired by when I picked up a book one day that I found at my parents' house, and that sort of got me really inspired to see some of the more remote places in Tasmania. I was just doing your regular hikes on tracks and things to start with, and then that got me really inspired. You can see that in this video, you can see a video I did recently about sort of the book and the movie that got me really inspired into some of this more remote and off-track hiking that I do now. In terms of favourite time of day to hike, well, it depends on the weather really. The weather, we can have 4 seasons in one day in Tasmania. So generally I like to get up early and go, and I'd like to finish my hiking day by around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I've got a few hours of enjoying the sunset and taking some photos, doing some photography, that sort of thing. And on recent walks I've been lucky enough to be able to get some really good afternoons like that. We've arrived at camp early after a big 7 or 8 hours walk, getting up early, often get up 4:30 a.m, 5 a.m, 6 a.m, often get up at 4:30 a.m, get off walking by 5:30, 6, and then we'll arrive at camp early and spend the afternoon doing photography, taking some videos, and just enjoying the solitude of being out in nature. So yeah, generally in the morning I would say, Joel. Thanks for the question. Next question comes from Ed, and he says, what do you do if you get lost? Well, I have been lost twice, and I haven't had to call in the rescue parties or anything. In addition to working as a pharmacist and a business owner for years, I've also been a bushwalking and hiking guide on Tasmania's overland track, and I've done about 50 trips on the overland track, guiding people through one of the most famous walks in Australia. But I also have spent time guiding people to remote areas, mainly friends, and I've taken them on some pretty remote walks. But a couple of times I have been lost. It's actually been pretty close to home on short day walks in really bad weather and fog, and that was for about half an hour. We were lost in the mist and in the fog, and figured out where we were and came back out. But if I was lost completely and had no idea where I were, then the general principle is stay where you are, and then I would activate my EPIRB device if I was injured. If I wasn't injured, I would set up camp, I would send some messages out to some people and say I'm quite lost. But this day and age, with all the equipment and map reading skills that I do have, I think I'd be hard pressed to be completely lost. I'd be able to sit down and keep my head together, I'd like to think, and figure out where I am, and then make a plan to get out of there. And then if I was injured, then it's hit the button on the emergency beacon and wait for the rescue helicopter to come, although I hope I never have to do that. So thanks for the questions, Joel. Another question from Richard now, and what is your favourite place to hike consistently? Well, if you've watched this channel before, or if you've watched some of the videos, then you'll know that Tassie, or Tasmania in Australia, is my go-to place. I think it's got the best bushwalking and hiking in the world, and that is my place where I go hiking. In terms of where in Tasmania I like to hike, then I'd have to say southwest Tasmania. It's my favourite part, but it is awfully wild. It is mainly largely untracked. It's not a place you go to lightly, and I've got friends who've been hiking for nearly 10 years, and they're only just starting to make their first journeys down into that region now. You really need to know what you're doing, you need to know what to take, what to do, and you need to be completely self-sufficient and know what you're doing. So I wouldn't recommend anyone goes down into that area until you have got some very good Tasmanian bushwalking miles on the form tracks under your belt. There's also the Central Plateau of Tasmania is wonderful. The overland track through Cradle Mountain Lake St Clair National Park is a great spot to go. I guided there for years, and I've done around 50 trips on the overland track. And if you wanted to pick one place in Tasmania to go and do a good diverse walk with a diverse range of landscapes, I'd tell you to go to the overland track. So thanks for the question, Richard. Another question asking, do you do private walking tours? Well, it's funny you should ask. I do have a company I started up, but I started it up right at the start of COVID, called Go Walk Tas. Check out the website. We're not currently doing tours. We've put it on hold while I pursue some other business interests until the storm sort of passes of COVID. Things are opening up now, so we are looking to potentially open that up for guided walking tours of my local hometown Launceston in Tasmania in late 2022. We do guided day tours, mainly focusing on the history of Launceston and the Cataract Gorge, which runs through the city with its river, the South Esk River. There's a great little video we made for Go Walk a couple of years ago. You can check out below in the link below. You can also check out the video for Go Walk here, so if you want to hang about, watch that, and you'll see that one too. Got another question here from Ed, and he says, what sort of survival techniques do you need? Well, I just make sure I'm really prepared and I've got all the equipment when I am heading out into the wilderness. I always have a full kit of dry gear in my pack. It doesn't matter how wet I am, I make sure I've got dry gear for when I get to camp. So when it is quite cold, I am ready to get set up in the tent, get the sleeping bag out, get warm gear on, get dry and get warm. You need to be able to identify when you are out of energy, when you are struggling, so that you know to stop the day. In Tasmania, if you were in a situation where you had to survive out in the wilderness, it may be a battle. There is very little in the way of food, basically nothing. So you need to be well prepared. There's always plenty of water around most of the time, except some of the mountain ranges, surprisingly, in the wettest areas of the state, can often be very, very dry. So you always need to be planning ahead with water and food. Surviving, if you're near the ocean, I guess you could try and catch some fish, but I haven't been in a situation where I've had to survive off the land for too long. So I just make sure I'm always well prepared and ready for just about anything. Another question here, how does your wife let you disappear for 10 days plus at a time? Well, that's a great question, and I don't know either, but I tend to go on a longer walk maybe once every year or probably every 2 years now, and I'm just lucky enough to have a very understanding and caring wife who just understands that it is my main passion in life is hiking and bushwalking and seeing these remote places. And I guess I just make sure I put in the work the rest of the time so that I'm not missed too much when I'm away for 10 days at a time, with leaving my wife at home with 4 kids. I'm very lucky. Question here again about survival. What do you do for survival when these 10-day blackout trips where I'm sort of out of range for 10 days? And again, it's just about being prepared, making sure you've got all the gear. So I'll lay it all out. I'll often start packing for a long trip a couple of weeks in advance to make sure that everything is in order. Planning food down to the gram, weighing everything. I'm doing that to ensure that I'm just being as efficient as I can with the equipment and gear that I'm taking. And the night before a trip, I will do a full analysis of everything I've got, and I will question every single piece of gear that I have and hold it in my hand and say, do I need to take this? And I'll eliminate a few unnecessary items in that process. And I will pack all my food into individual days food. That each bag is for a day, and that is the food for that day, no more, no less. And then a bit of extra emergency food should I need it if I get caught out there for a bit longer. But it's all about planning and execution and just being well organised. And 30 years of planning trips into the wilderness, you become reasonably good at it. Another question, how do you balance your family work life with your bushwalking? Well, the beauty of bushwalking is you can involve your family in it. So we are starting to get out a bit more now, trying to get out, and we love going out on some walks. And now that our youngest son's almost old enough, we're going to go on some extended walks and do some longer, for 2 or 3 nights. The whole family will go and hopefully have a good time. But it's just trying not to impede on the family time too much, just try and find those little gaps where I've got a bit of time by myself. I'll only have to drive half an hour, and I can be at a really good bushwalk from where I live. What is it about the outdoors that keeps a fire in your belly? Another question. Well, it's just when you're out there, these vistas and views you get, it is just awe-inspiring, it really is. And you just got to take a moment when you're on some of these remote peaks and you just sort of think to yourself, this is incredible. And it's a feeling you never forget. And once you have done a few of these mountains, even the popular ones that lots of people go to, like Cradle Mountain, once you've been up there and you've just breathed in the fresh air, it's just an incredible feeling, and you don't forget it, especially when you get the weather right, and you just find yourself wanting to head back out there. So that sort of keeps me there. And there's peaks I've done 20 to 30 times. The highest peak in Tasmania I've done 20 to 30 times, and I don't get sick of going up there because there's always something new, something different, and it's just a wonderful place to be, and I love being up there. It is a bit hard to describe, but it's just something I love doing. Another question here, what is the main fear that you regularly face? I guess the thing that I constantly think about, I'm just worried about treading on a snake. I don't want to tread on a snake and get bitten, but no, honestly, there's not really much in the way of immediate fear when I'm out there. I really enjoy it. I like being in the wilderness and remote, thrive off it. And yeah, if anything, some of these bigger, harder peaks in Tasmania, or they're some of the hardest peaks in Australia, they can get pretty exposed, which means you are on the side of some pretty big cliffs and drops, that can be a little scary, especially if you're afraid of heights. Over the years, as I keep heading back to these areas, each time I think, well, it's pretty steep, where I didn't used to think that. So maybe the heights now is coming into it a little bit, but generally not too much worries me. It's just when I'm on these exposed sections that I've just got to make sure I'm really careful and not doing anything too silly or too drastic. But once you're on those peaks, it is spectacular, it's amazing. But I wouldn't recommend it if you are afraid of heights. And the mountains in Tasmania, the highest mountain's only just over 1,600 metres high. So they don't sound like high mountains, but we've got some very big cliffs off the sides of these mountains. It can be a few hundred metres high, and it's not something you want to fall off. So it's sort of constantly in the back of your mind. Question from Jane. What would you say to someone who has never hiked before to encourage them to try it? Now, I worked as a guide, bushwalking, hiking guide on Tasmania's overland track for a few years and took over 50 trips on the overland track. One thing I would say is just go with someone who knows what they're doing. Don't try, first time you're heading out, don't go on a big trip. Make it a shorter walk, just a day walk, and go on a nice day. Don't go on this bad weather. And just go on a short walk for a couple of hours and see what it's like. And just keep gradually building up to the point where you can eventually go on a full day or an overnight walk and stand on top of a mountain. Go and do Cradle Mountain. Go and do a mountain in your local national park where you live. There's lots of well-formed trails all around the world that I've hiked, and it's just a matter of just sort of dipping your toe in and gradually getting used to it and building up your confidence. I think it's the main thing, just build up your confidence, don't overcommit too early, and just gradually just ease into it, take your time, and you'll find that you might actually like it. And when you're out there, it's almost like meditation when you're out there in the wilderness and you're standing on top of a peak, and it's just like that. It's a good feeling, and I encourage everyone to give it a go and give it some time. You won't like it straight away necessarily, but if you just pick your days and go, then I think you'll learn to love it. I think you'll find that you enjoy it.